Skill-based matchmaking has been a topic of heated debates ever since it was first introduced in Dead by Daylight. On one hand, it's a really useful feature because it adds a degree of competitiveness. On the other hand, it often turns the game into an absolute nightmare where you can't relax even for a second because you keep going against absolute no-lifer sweatlords. But why did BHVR introduce SBMM in the first place? To answer that question, we're gonna need to go all the way back to 2016 when Dead by Daylight just launched. Back then, matchmaking was rank-based. Ranks were colored icons with numbers that show which skill group you currently belong to. Survivors and killers had a separate rank, which was shared by all characters within the role. There were 20 ranks in total, with 20 being the lowest and 1 the highest. They were split into 5 groups of 4, each marked by its own color: gray, puke green, normal green, purple, and iridescent. In order to rank up, you had to earn a certain amount of so-called pips. The diamond-shaped thing is displayed under the rank icon. 3 pips for ranks 20 and 19, 4 pips for ranks 18 to 13, and 5 pips for ranks 12 to 1. To pip, you had to earn 10,000 blood points or more across 4 scoring categories: objective, survival, altruism, and boldness for survivors, and brutality, deviousness, hunter, and sacrifice for killers. Failing to reach that threshold resulted in losing a pip. Earning 20,000 or more gave you a double pip, allowing you to rank up faster. To rank up efficiently, it was really important to spread your actions evenly across all categories. Out of the 8,000 possible blood points per category, only the first 5,000 actually counted toward your rank. Anything you earned beyond that didn't affect it. It was just added to your account for unlocking perks and add-ons. So for example, if a player had earned 8,000 blood points in one category and 2,000 in another, they wouldn't gain a pip. They would actually de-pip, because that's only 7,000 ranking blood points, which is 3,000 short of the pipping threshold. Under ideal circumstances, you were supposed to match with players of the same rank group, but in reality it often wasn't the case. Sometimes there just weren't enough people in your group, so to make sure you weren't stuck looking for a match for like 40 minutes, the game would broaden the search parameters and put you in the lobby with people from the closest groups. Sometimes it was good, because it could give you an easier opponent, but sometimes not so much, because the opponent could end up being way out of your league. As a survivor, the game could actually screw you over twice by also giving you teammates whose level was significantly lower than yours. But this wasn't the weirdest thing about the original ranking system. It had 2 other major flaws. First, it made your rank heavily dependent on your opponent's playstyle. Say you went against a team with 4 brand new parts. Originally, that add-on fixed gens in literally one touch, which allowed survivors to escape in like 80 seconds. This made you finish the match with blood points barely enough to buy a green add-on, and as a result de-pip. Just like survivors, by the way, who in that case would also end up with roughly 9,000 blood points each. Same if the killer brought a Mori. Originally, it allowed you to kill survivors immediately after they went down for the first time, and if you quickly killed 3 but the 4th one got the hatch, you would also de-pip. As a survivor, you could try to get around that by first engaging in a chase with the killer to farm extra blood points, but for that to work, you had to be sure you'd be able to last long enough to reach the peeping threshold. If you went down before that, there might not have been another chance. The killer could just face camped or moried you, and that would still cost you a pip. The second flaw was that ranks were heavily exploitable, allowing for super easy smurfing. The fact that you could lose a pip meant that any player who got tired of the red rank sweat could intentionally derank and go back to terrorizing noobs. For this, you had to either AFK in every match you loaded in to keep your blood point score as low as possible, or simply disconnect from it, because that also penalized players by taking away their pips. It took quite a lot of time and patience, but nevertheless allowed you to force reset your rank at any time. If you played Survivor but didn't want to waste time manually lowering your rank, there was another loophole for you. You could just team up with a friend whose rank was lower than yours, and the game would match you against a killer whose rank was the average of yours and your teammates. This feature was added to make sure that if an experienced player teamed up with someone who just picked up the game, the latter wouldn't have to deal with 5 blink nurses with hundreds of hours on record. But for the former, it was a legitimate way to bully low-rank killers, which a lot of people happily did. Ranks were only valid for 1 ranking season, which lasted for 1 month. On the 13th day of every month, they would partially reset, making players grind for them again. The player's post-reset rank was determined by the total number of ranks obtained during the season, which was converted into pips. This would reset rank 1 players to rank 15 with 1 pip, rank 2 to exactly rank 15, rank 3 to rank 16 with 3 pips, and so on. Considering there was no reward for having your rank reset, it might seem like a pointless feature, but most players still looked forward to it, especially legit red rank players who didn't smurf, because for a while it let them escape the sweat of red ranks and experience a more relaxed version of the game with mixed ranks. Rank reset was such an important part of the old DBD culture that it even gave rise to an entire subgenre of videos, compilations of funny and chaotic moments caught in the first day of the rank reset. Apparently, BHVR realized early on that taking away a pip for winning matches too fast was a bad idea. To mitigate that issue, about 2 months after the game's release, they made quite big adjustments to the pipping zones. From that point on, you lost a pip only if you scored lower than 7,000 points, while 7,000 to 9,999 granted a so-called safety pip. That's when you neither lost nor earned a pip, preserving your original rank. It didn't completely solve the issue. The fact that you could win a match and your rank wouldn't change was still technically suffering from success, but it was still an improvement. The next major change to the ranking system came in the summer of 2017, marking the beginning of its downfall. In patch 1.5.3, as part of the so-called Victory Cube update, BHVR completely detached killer ranks from blood points. From that point on, whether you ranked up as the killer depended on how many goals you scored during the match. Goals were points earned for bringing survivors closer to being sacrificed. You could earn up to 4 goal points per survivor. The following events contributed to your goal score: Fresh Hook 1 point, Struggle Phase 1 point, Sacrifice 2 points, Mori 2 points, Bleeding Out 1 point, Survivor disconnecting during loading 2 points, and Survivor disconnecting during the match 4 points. To pip, you had to score between 9 and 15 points. Scoring 16 earned you a double pip. 8 points counted as a draw and gave you a safety pip, while anything below that was a D pip. In other words, the focus was no longer on just playing well overall. It was actually on killing survivors, which made killers play much sweatier than before. With the old blood point based ranking system, you could go for fresh hooks the entire match, and even if you didn't kill anyone by the end, you could still pip. You just had to make sure you made up for the lack of blood points in the sacrifice category with points from the others. Yeah, I agree it wasn't a perfect system, because rewarding killers who don't really kill doesn't make much sense. But on the other hand, how do you not reward the killer who managed to, let's say, 2-hook everyone? That's almost 70% of their objective. That should count for at least 1 pip, especially with the 2016 balance where survivors were the real power role. Another issue with gold points was that unlike blood points, they were hidden and couldn't be tracked via the UI. You had to do it in your head, which I'm not gonna pretend was hard, but with blood points it was even easier, since each category updated in real time after every relevant event. That made things a bit more transparent, but unfortunately, transparency wasn't something BHVR seemed to want in their game, and later they'd prove that. As you've probably noticed, I haven't mentioned how the Victory Cube affected the way survivors ranked up, and that's because it didn't. The ranking system was still blood point based. My guess is that in their case, BHVR simply couldn't determine a single most important category of actions to tie pipping to. Or maybe they could, but decided not to go through with it, thinking it would make ranking up too difficult. Because unlike killers, survivors don't always have control over what they do during the match or when they do it. But soon enough, things changed even for survivors. In patch 1.9.4, both goal point ranking for killers and blood point ranking for survivors were replaced with a unified emblem system. Just like the name suggests, that system tracked the player's performance using emblems. Each side had 4 of them. Survivors had Benevolent for altruistic actions, Evader for hiding and running away, Lightbringer for repairing generators, opening the gates and completing side objectives, and Unbroken for tracking how many times you went down during the match, or if you died, how long you managed to stay alive. Killers had Chaser for finding and catching survivors, Devout for killing them, Gatekeeper for gen defense efficiency, and Malicious for hook states, injuring survivors and preventing their altruistic actions. Every action within an emblem contributed to its quality, which could be bronze, silver, gold, or iridescent. The total points across all 4 emblems determined how many pips you received, which just like before could be -1, 0, 1, or 2. Emblem points could not only be earned but also lost. That happened as a penalty for playing poorly. For example, when you got hit during a chase as a survivor, or when survivors pulled off a flashlight or pallet save against you as the killer. Sometimes you could make up for the lost points by performing the opposite action. For instance, when a survivor got hooked, the whole team lost benevolent points, but when that survivor got unhooked, those points were returned to them, while the rescuer earned bonus points. All of this added extra depth to the gameplay, turning it into a sort of tug-of-war. Unfortunately, that's about the only positive thing I can say about the emblem system. If you take a closer look, you'll realize its existence in the game isn't justified one bit. Seriously, just look at the descriptions of Lightbringer, Benevolent, and Evader. They're literally just objectives, altruism, and boldness under new names. The same goes for killers. Their Devout, Malicious, and Chaser are basically just the good old Sacrifice, Brutality, and Hunter. The only truly unique emblems that didn't overlap with any of the blood point categories were Unbroken and Gatekeeper. Before they were introduced, gen defense efficiency and the ability to avoid going down weren't recognized as official gameplay elements. Sure, that wasn't great, but not to the point where we needed an entire parallel point system, especially if it was gonna be a shadow system. Yes, just like gold points, the emblem system was hidden, which meant that now even survivors MMRs couldn't track their pip progress during the match. I guess just like with goal points, you could memorize every action in each emblem and try to keep track of your progress manually. But there were so many of them that in practice a lot of people didn't even bother and just played the game like ranks didn't exist, which was what Behavior was ultimately trying to achieve, make people play casually and not competitively. Over the 8 years emblems have been in the game, they've gone through a gazillion of changes. Some were just small scoring threshold tweaks, while others added entirely new scoring events. But I'm not gonna go over them in detail. That'd be not only boring, but also pointless, since the entire emblem system would soon become completely irrelevant. In the summer of 2018, the devs further increased skill segregation by putting low, mid, and high-rank players into their own lanes. To do this, they made it so players below rank 15 could no longer lose pips, and players at rank 15 or higher couldn't derank past rank 15, unless of course it happened due to the rank reset. That essentially turned gray ranks into tutorial ranks, where players stayed only while learning the basics of the game. Also, it put an end to the most extreme cases of smurfing, which was definitely a good thing. Next, they changed the rank reset logic. Now ranks no longer rolled almost all the way back, but instead only about half of what you had grinded during the season. For example, if before the reset you were rank 1, you'd become rank 10 with 2 pips, rank 5 would become rank 12 with 3 pips, rank 10 would become rank 14, rank 15 would become rank 17 with 1 pip, and so on. Basically, this change ensured that the reset no longer put players with a clear skill gap too close together, allowing Behavior to form more distinct skill pools. About a year and a half later, they refined this idea by making ranks reset back by one color. Red ranks would reset to purple, rank 5, purple to green, rank 9, green to puke green, rank 13, and puke green to brown, rank 17. And again, all that made perfect sense, because ideally the weak should compete with the weak and the strong with the strong. However, looking back at that period, I can say with confidence that it was the moment the game took its first step toward becoming the unbearable sweatfest it is today. The second and the final step happened in the fall of 2021 with the introduction of skill-based matchmaking. Now, what is skill-based matchmaking? It's a type of matchmaking based on your ability to play the game, represented by your MMR. MMR stands for Matchmaking Rating and refers to the points you lose, keep, or earn depending on the outcome of the match. The entire MMR spectrum ranges from 0 to 2,100 points. Just like ranks is divided into groups known as skill brackets, of which there are 4. 0 to 649 points. This is the bottom of the barrel where you find clueless beginners with only a few hours on record. 650 to 899 points. This is your below average bracket, populated by players who've learned the basics but still can't play all that well. 900 to 1399 points. This is where you find casual players who definitely know what they're doing but don't necessarily sweat every match like their life depends on it. 1400 to 2100 points. This is the hardcore elite of the game who play far more competitively than the rest of the player base. Another very important milestone is 1600 points, which is the so-called soft cap. Once you reach it, Behavior officially considers you top MMR and applies the point loss protection mechanic to your account. That doesn't mean you can't lose points at all, but the losses reduce so much that to drop below the soft cap, you'd literally have to lose tens if not hundreds of games in a row. Obviously, no sane person with a life would do that, so in most cases hitting the soft cap means being stuck in high MMR hell forever. But why did Behavior add the soft cap in the first place? Well, the most popular theory is that it allows them to force populate the top skill bracket. According to their stats, only about 5% of players are above the soft cap, which means the top bracket doesn't have many people to play with. Since the game always tries to keep queue times to a minimum, it has no choice but to match them against players from other brackets. But Behavior doesn't want this to happen too often, so they use the soft cap to keep the top bracket relatively alive. But I think there might be another explanation, namely Behavior just trying to maximize profit from new players. Unlike veterans, newcomers don't have much unlocked in their accounts, which makes them more inclined to spend money on the game. But for that to happen, the game has to make a good first impression, so they actually have a reason to stick around. And what better way to achieve that than by locking all the tryhards behind the soft cap jail? That gets rid of all the sweat in the lower brackets and actually makes DBD look fun. And hey, if you're playing anyway, you might as well buy a couple of skins and DLCs, am I right? The way MMR is calculated is pretty simple. As the killer, you gain points if you get a 3 or 4k. If you get a 2k, your points stay the same. And if you get a 1k or nothing, you lose points. As a survivor, you gain points if you escape through an exit gate, keep points if you escape through the hatch, and lose points if you die by any means. In addition to that, there are 3 modifiers that affect the amount of points you get. The first is the match length modifier. The longer the match lasts, the more points you gain. This modifier is capped at 10 minutes, after which MMR gain stops. The second is the opponent modifier. If you win against an opponent whose MMR is lower than yours, killers, your point gain decreases. If you lose against them, your point loss increases. But if their MMR is higher, winning gives you more points and losing costs you fewer points. The third is the Swift modifier. It's exclusive to survivors and activates when you queue with at least one teammate. If you escape, your point gain increases for each escaped teammate and decreases for each dead one. If you die, your point loss decreases for each escaped teammate and increases for each dead one. The maximum number of points you can gain or lose during a match is 20. As you can see, the MMR system doesn't take a whole lot of factors into account, basically reducing the game to a simple kill-escape dichotomy. And that's not very healthy for two reasons. First, just like the gold point system, it doesn't really reflect how good or bad someone actually is. In fact, if you think about it, for killers it works almost exactly like the gold point system, completely ignoring how many hook states you've farmed. But at least the gold point system only applied to killers. Skill-based matchmaking, on the other hand, f***s things up for survivors too. Let's say you fix one gen, get chased for 5 minutes, go down and get camped to death. Meanwhile, your team finishes the remaining gens and escapes, leaving the killer with only one kill. How is that a loss for you and a win for your teammates? You literally did most of the heavy lifting while all they did was press spacebar for 5 minutes. Second, skill-based matchmaking makes the game way more boring and sweaty than it needs to be. Again, just like the gold point system, but for both sides. So it's camping, tunneling and slugging for killers and gen rushing and escaping as fast as possible for survivors. I swear, only BHVR could come up with a system like that while aggressively trying to get rid of camping and tunneling. You might think that when you log into a new account, you start at 0 MMR and gradually work your way to the top, but that's not entirely true. Initially, your MMR is set to 650 points and you have to go through a calibration period that lasts several matches. During this time, you neither lose nor gain points. The game just closely monitors your performance, and once it's done, it assigns you to an MMR bracket that matches your skill level. This acts as an anti-smurf measure, making sure that when an experienced player creates a fresh account, they can't validate their ego at the expense of bad players for too long. Ideally, once your MMR bracket is set, the game should start matching you with players from that bracket. In the lowest skill bracket, that's actually mandatory, because these players are just learning how to play, and that's best done against people of the same skill level. For other brackets, the rule isn't that strict. Most of the time it still applies, but as I mentioned before, when there aren't enough people, the game may backfill from other brackets to keep queue times short. This is especially noticeable if you play outside of your region's prime hours, or if you queue for standard mode during an event or modifier. These always attract the majority of casual players, turning standard mode into a fucking war zone. Since mechanically all survivors are absolutely identical, they share a single MMR score. Killers, on the other hand, are all unique, so each of them has their own MMR. This means that if you max out MMR on one killer but then switch to another you've never played before, the game doesn't immediately throw you against a 4-man squad of unemployed tryhards. But it also doesn't mean you'll get complete potatoes either, because it's not like you're learning the game from scratch. At the very least, you already know the macro gameplay, which by behavior's logic is enough to compete with medium survivors. To ensure you go against them, they use MMR rubber banding, a mechanic that automatically raises all killers below 1200 points up to that threshold once at least one of your killers reaches the soft cap. MMR rubber banding is exactly the reason you can't switch killers once you've started queuing for a match. Otherwise, people would use new killers to find easy survivors, but then actually play as the one they've already mastered. But I guess it's not that bad. 1200 points is still technically the casual segment, so if you're a top 5% killer and you want to break from high-level matches, try a new character for a change. It's basically a legal smurfing loophole. Survivors can smurf too, by the way. In their case, all it takes is grouping up with someone who has lower MMR. Just like with ranks, it'll put you against a killer whose MMR is gonna be the average of your groups. But arguably the biggest sin of skill-based matchmaking is the fact that, once again, it's a hidden system, and not the gold point or emblem kinda hidden. With those, you at least had some sort of feedback on the post-game tally screen. Skill-based matchmaking is hidden, to the point where you won't find your MMR even if you click through every single menu in the game. It literally took data miners for the community to learn the details of how it actually works. Yes, almost everything I've told you about it in this video isn't official information, so take it with a grain of salt. Over the 3 years MMR has been in the game, its hidden nature has caused a lot of chaos in the community. The biggest drama so far happened in the spring of 2024, when TrueTalent got into a confrontation with several other content creators over smurfing accusations. Around that time, he conducted an experiment debunking a pretty popular opinion that skill-based matchmaking doesn't actually work, and that in reality there's just one big pool of players where everybody plays against everybody. Afterward, he made a tweet saying that players from lower brackets play exactly like the ones some YouTubers go against in their videos, implying that they smurf for content. He didn't drop any concrete names, but mentioned that he was referring to videos that got recommended to him, which led a lot of people to believe he was talking about the big boys of the DBD YouTube. YouTube, because whose videos show up on YouTube recommendations the most, right? This kicked off a massive beef between them and True, which gradually turned into a debate about MMR and how it can be manipulated. Some people refused to accept smurfing even as a theoretical possibility, while others pointed out all the loopholes that basically allow you to do exactly that. For the lack of better sources, people kept citing the SBMM article from the DVD wiki. Its editors didn't really like that, because they didn't want to be a part of that drama, which eventually led to them hiding almost all the information from the article. Funny to think how all that could have been avoided if behavior just showed us the numbers. When skill-based matchmaking was introduced, MMR took over the roles of ranks, making them, and by extension emblems, redundant. As a result, ranks were removed, and that's just crazy to me. Behavior put in so much time and effort to get them to work, only to eventually give up and go for something completely different. Emblems got lucky and were tied to a brand new mechanic called grades. Grades are basically a spiritual successor to ranks. They work almost the same way, except they don't affect matchmaking. You grind them to earn a blood point reward at the end of the season. The higher you climb, the bigger the reward. For a long time, the similarity between ranks and grades caused a lot of confusion, especially among beginners. When they saw that their opponents had higher grades, it made them freak out because they thought they'd accidentally ended up in a high-skill lobby where they stood no chance. Eventually, this made behavior hide grades from practically everywhere, and now you can only find them on the profile screen. Grades weren't super relevant even before that change, but after it, people pretty much forgot about them altogether. The final nail in the coffin for grades came when behavior removed the ability to lose pips. Even in their original state, you couldn't lose enough pips to drop a grade, but now that you can't depeep at all, grades have lost any meaning whatsoever and are just an expression of how often you play the game during the month. Now that we've figured out exactly what's wrong with skill-based matchmaking, can it be fixed? Probably. In fact, if you spend some time on Google, you'll find some posts describing exactly how that can be done. Some people are pretty optimistic. They think that simply breaking the MMR range into more brackets and making people match strictly within them will suffice. Others are more radical. They ask for a dedicated competitive mode to make SBMM apply exclusively there, leaving the standard mode for fun and casual matches. But honestly, I don't think any of these suggestions would work. More brackets and more accurate matchmaking sound great in theory, but they'd make queue times even worse than they already are. Same with competitive mode. Introducing it would split the standard 2-queue structure into a 4-queue one, which would make finding a match take about as long as it does for killers in 2v8. And now imagine if on top of that there's actually 2v8. Queue times would skyrocket so much you'd be playing maybe one match an hour tops. Are you willing to make that sacrifice? If so, you might as well just join the ranked DVD server on Discord. Matches there take ages to set up, so you'll get pretty much the same experience. But don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to diss that server. With the limited resources its owners had, they actually came up with a surprisingly functional way to play competitive matches. If you're interested, I'll leave the link to the server as well as the introductory video in the description. So what do we do then? Well, maybe instead of looking for new solutions, for once we should turn to something old that's already proven to work. Listen, behavior, it's time to return to rank-based matchmaking. Seriously, there's nothing MMR does that ranks don't. But unlike MMR, ranks don't make the game feel so hardcore. Thanks to the monthly rank reset, you'd get a regular break from the stress of high-level gameplay and actually get to enjoy the game for a bit. Some might call it glorified smurfing, and they wouldn't be wrong. But if it means high-rank players won't feel the game is holding them hostage anymore, I think it's a sacrifice worth making. To keep smurfing under control, we could use the rank reset logic of the late ranking system, where you only lost half of your progress. And as an extra safety measure, we could even borrow the no depeeping principle from grades. Ranks should be openly displayed. This would put an end to hidden smurfing and provide one more form of progression, making grinding feel a little less pointless. For high-tier players who care about maintaining their status, it would serve as a direct testament to their skill and dedication. Those who don't care as much would still benefit. Seeing that they've just defeated someone with a higher rank would give them a small ego boost, and if they lose, they won't feel as bad. I'd probably still keep ranks hidden in the pre-game lobby though, so killers couldn't use them to cherry-pick easy survivors like they did originally. For the reasons I've explained earlier, ranks should be blood point based, but unlike the original system, I'd put more focus on the sacrifice and objectives categories, so you wouldn't be able to peep without doing the main thing for your role. I'd also either convert the Unbroken and Gatekeeper emblems into brand new blood point categories, or at least make them part of the existing ones. To make the competition between the two sides more pronounced, we could even borrow the tug-of-war principle from emblems for some actions. Naturally, there absolutely needs to be a reward for hitting rank 1. Not just blood points, though they wouldn't hurt. I'm I'm talking about something like a limited badge or banner, or better yet a whole skin that changes every season. All this is fairly easy to implement. The devs wouldn't even have to do much coding. For the most part, they could just reuse their old spaghetti code. Will they do it though? Well, it's pretty clear they never liked the idea of ranks all that much, so I wouldn't count on it. Which is why if you still haven't developed a taste for skill-based matchmaking, I suggest you start working on it ASAP, because we're most likely stuck with it forever.